We're really packing in the crowds today. This is a very special edition of Daily Thunder, obviously, because I mean I've never seen such a crowd, and I'm saying that in a humorous way too. This is like this one time during the training season where we're just about to have the arrival of our 1 week students, and we just had our alumni transition out. So we have a smattering. Nathan spread out chairs to make it, to make sure my eye contact with the crowd was going to be evenly dispersed. But it is a joy having those of you that are here. And it's the irony of this is almost like what you could call the crucial core centerpiece of it. Like in the flow of the Bible, you have the cross, and you have everything that leads up to the cross, and you have everything that flows out of the cross. Well, this message is December 17th, 1903, and everyone scatters and leaves for this one. So this has potential to be the most important message in the entire series, episode 15. And so isn't it fun that you guys could be here for that? I love this message. This particular one is very, very special. First of all, my birthday is December 17th. And so since we're going to reflect upon December 17th, I feel a personal kinship with this particular message. Because all growing up, every time I look at a calendar, it would say something about the Wright brothers on my birthday. You know, you look at a calendar, you always look at your birthday, right? And the Wright brothers were always trying to stake claim to my birthday. So a special episode. It's called 12 Seconds. And for those of you that know the history of flight, that might stand out to you and you'd have an understanding of what that means. But for those of you that don't, I think you guys will really enjoy the discovery of that. So I'm going to call this the endless loop. And this is something that those of us that live life on earth in this territory of light, dark, this territory of spirit and physical, this engagement of realms that exists where you have this rebellion that is taking place in the earthen realm against the spirit realm. And you're going to see this hostility and this battle that ensues. There's this process that has been built into it that actually is our great strengthening. And in the Bible, in the New Testament especially, as we begin to understand what I could call the doctrine of suffering, you're going to recognize the attitude of the New Testament. You could say the New Testament writers are going to say this friction that we have, this embattlement that we have, that at first blush would be something that we would complain about. Our natural man would want to grumble. This is actually our secret of strength if we embrace it. So all that the enemy is meaning in creating this friction is actually what causes us to use the illustration of this entire series, to fly. And so we're going to see that cycle of friction in this storyline in a beautiful fashion. So I'm calling this the endless loop. Faith, which then once you have faith, there's friction against your faith. And then there's a fight. And then there's flight. And then there's more friction. And that's the storyline that we're actually walking through. Very specifically, we're going to see this in different forms in the New Testament. I'll give you one of the samplings of it. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So, familiar scripture. I've mentioned this in this series before because up to this point, this is part of the entire idea behind what the Wright brothers are demonstrating in their discovery of flight. They are giving us a parallel for our discovery as spiritual beings of being able to bull ride the wind or be able to heed the Holy Spirit, to be able to pull off an impossible life that no human could actually live. But spiritually speaking, we are called and exhorted to live it. So is it making fun of us and mocking us because there's no way we could ever do this? Or does God actually intend us to live an impossible life? I am going to go and vote with the latter. I believe very strongly that God intends us, very natural beings, created beings that live in an earthen realm, to actually fly, to actually live a supernatural life. And that's what we call Christianity. So here's a pattern And I'm going to put it on the screen. On the far left, you're going to see various trials, which is where this starts, okay? In my other illustration, I was calling it friction. So various trials are going to create a testing of faith. When our faith is tested, we are exhorted in Scripture to rejoice or to consider it the highest rung of joy. Why? Because that various trial and that testing of faith is going to create something known as patience. And when patience is at work within us, it perfects us. And isn't that the goal? Aren't we desirous to become more like Christ? So what is the secret to this process? But is to allow our faith to be tested is an actual joy point in our life. How we respond to that testing of our faith is going to define the outcome of it. But then you're going to notice that even though we are being perfected, various trials don't cease. It's like, wait a minute, I already went through this once. Why in the world do I get another various trial? And yet that is the process of growth and perfecting that God has designed. And, you could ask the question of, in heaven, are we going to have this same process? I don't know that I can answer that. I'm not exactly sure how things work when you eliminate the powers of darkness from the picture. I think all of us are very excited to find out. However, one of the things we can embrace is in this season, this is the secret spiritually for our growth, that when we embrace these challenges that seem built in to the system, we actually thrive. So here's our same type of graphic for today. And this is the story of the Wright brothers. In this very storyline, we have friction. I mean, that's nonstop friction for the Wright brothers up to this point. If you've gone through the first 14 episodes, you know that. It's just like what these guys are trying to do is ridiculous. It's impossible. Just give up. And there's been so many moments where most of us would have given up. They have not given up, which is very inspiring. And it's because they have something known as faith. They actually believe that this can be done. They do. That's the reason that they keep going. But when they exert their faith, what do they get? More friction. And yet that friction is going to then create a dogged response within them to fight because their faith is real. And they're going to fight and fight and fight against the friction. And ultimately, that's going to result in something known as flight. And then once they discover flight, guess what they get? More friction. Wait till you hear this story. This is truly remarkable. So I'm going to give you the outline for the story here. And this, I thought about, I shouldn't do this, but I decided to do it anyways. I'm giving you something. I usually like to hold back storyline, but I'm going to give it to you because I'm not going to fill in any gaps of how this all fits together. But first of all, it's going to start with the faith. This is like sort of a direct quote from Orville Wright. This is 100%, sorry guys, that was a terrible sentence. This is 110% going to work. Okay, so that's not just like, I believe this is going to work. This is going to work, and I am 110% confident. Okay, that's going down the home stretch. That's faith, right? The friction, the wind, the cold, the busted engine, the broken propellers, the ice, the snow, Sam Langley's efforts up in Washington, D.C., trying to be the first one to fly. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in this story. And then the fight, nothing is going to stop us. And then the flight, we are determined to see this work. Very inspiring. And of course, if you remember, I had a loop and then more friction. So let's start with the faith. This is 110% going to work. Now that's an indirect quote, and it comes from this statement of Orville Wright in his postcard to Charlie Taylor in October of 1903. So they're in Kitty Hawk. Flight is going to take place December 17th, 1903. We're in October of 1903. And Orville is going to say this. Now, I might need to interpret this for you. He's speaking in Wall Street language to Charlie. He's trying to be funny, okay? He says, flying machine market has been very unsteady the past 2 days. Opened yesterday morning at about 2:08. 100% means even chance of success. But by noon, it dropped to 110. These fluctuations would have produced a panic, I think, in Wall Street. But in this quiet place, it only puts us to thinking and figuring a little. In other words, what he's saying is, just yesterday, we knew we were like at 208 in our percentage of likelihood of this working. 208% chance that this is going to happen. In other words, it's not just 100% confidence. It's like, we are more than confident that this is going to work. And then they had a few setbacks, and now they're down to 110% confident. In other words, they know it's going to work, but they've had a few setbacks, which is an understatement for what they're walking into right now. So Charlie Taylor, he was the Wright's mechanic. In fact, the last message was almost exclusively on Charlie Taylor. He said this: if there was any worry about the flying machine, at least the number 4 version, which they just took out to Kitty Hawk, the one that's actually going to eventually fly, if there was any worry about the flying machine not working, they never showed it, and I never felt it. This is such a unique thing in the storyline, is that these two were pulling off something that actually everyone around them declared could not be done. Even the highest degree of scientists at the time, the highest minds, were saying, this will never happen. And they knew that they knew that they knew that they could fly. And so that's coming down the home stretch. This is a very, very important theme. So let's move to the friction. So the wind, the cold, the busted engine, the broken propellers, the ice, the snow, and Sam Langley's efforts. I'm not going to go into Sam Langley's efforts. They are taking place. Samuel Langley, the director of the Smithsonian, is trying to beat the Wright brothers to fly. And so that was a separate episode. I think it was called Sam Langley's Pride. The poor guy got a whole episode dedicated to his pride. And he is attempting to beat the Wright brothers. It didn't go well for him. I'm just going to be honest with you. And he's going to go down and die, I think, 3 years later, totally humiliated. And meanwhile, the Wright brothers are not even following the news. They're out in Kitty Hawk. They don't know what's going on. And so they're not trying to follow that. They're just trying to do their thing. But they still have the friction of it because people keep mentioning it. It's like one of those things. It's like, could you please just not bring that up again? So let's walk into some of it. Here's their journal, the Invention Journal, written by Orville Wright. Monday, November 2nd, 1903, began work of placing engine on machine. So they are going to build all of this out in Dayton, Ohio, and then they're going to transport this 600-plus pound flying machine in pieces, because they couldn't even have enough room in Dayton to build it, so it had never been built before, and they're going to transfer it out to Kitty Hawk, and that's quite the project, just in and of itself, and then they're going to construct it, and that's what they've been doing for the past couple months. They're constructing this, and now for the first time, an engine is being put onto a plane. Okay, this is like a very big deal in history. And Wednesday, November 8th, says, have machine now within a half day of completion. So you can see, even in the momentum in their journal, that they know they're ready, okay? Once they get this engine established, then they're ready to try, okay, which is a pretty exciting thing. I mean, we should have flight in November of 1903. David McCullough says it this way: but when the next day they started up the motor, the magneto, a small generator utilizing magnets, failed to deliver a spark to ignite the gas, and the vibrations of the misfiring engine tore loose and badly twisted the propeller shafts. With little chance of more flight tests anytime soon, George Spratt chose to go home. He was one of the guys helping them out there, taking with them the damaged shafts as far as Norfolk to be shipped back to Charlie Taylor in Dayton. Oh, another setback. If you followed this story, we have setback after setback after setback. You guys getting tired of setbacks? I mean, setbacks can just sort of drain your energy fairly quickly. And have you ever had that point where it's just like one more setback and I give up? Okay, the devil loves to get you to that point where you start to even mutter it out loud yourself, because the entire goal of the enemy is to get you to give up. And so when you start enunciating one more, well, guess what the enemy, gets baited towards? Like, oh, that's all I need is one more? You see, you have to make it clear to your enemy that you will never stop. There is never a point in the Christian life where you say, oh, I've had enough. That doesn't even work in the kingdom of heaven. The very trials that are testing you are the very trials that build you. So the more the enemy tries to test you, the stronger you get. You need to think like a Christian. So David McCullough says, in the last days of November, snow fell, something they had not seen before on the Outer Banks. Water in their wash basin froze solid. If you remember one of the earlier episodes when I was introducing Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, which is in the middle of nowhere, it's basically wilderness, one of the original statements from the postmaster was, you want to sort of transition out of Kitty Hawk around mid-October, because mid-October, things start to get rather rough out here. And it's rough. I mean, any of us that have gone through the summer seasons in Kitty Hawk in this series so far are like, yeah, it's rough all year round. It's a constant gusting winds in Kitty Hawk, which ironically is why the Wright brothers are even there. It has sand hills, and so the sand is blowing around all the time too. That's the reason the Wright brothers are there. It's a soft landing for their testing, right? And it's hills, so they can get a high starting point and then test their gliders and see how to ride the wind. All of this works great. Why in the world are the Wright brothers still there come the end of November? I don't know if you've ever had that where you sense you're close to something, and it's just like, I don't really care how cold it is. We're going to get this thing working. So it was supposed to be done a lot earlier than this, but one problem after the next keeps delaying it, and they're not going home. And yet to live out here during the winter, they have this little shed. It's not like it has insulation in it. This is like frigid, cold conditions, and they're like, I'm not going home. We're going to fly this thing. Everything about this story is very inspiring if you apply it to your spiritual life. So new propeller shafts made of larger, heavier steel tubing arrived from Charlie, only to crack during an indoor test. With no delay, Orville, the better mechanic of the two, packed his bag and on November 30th left for Dayton to see what could be done, with Wilbur remaining behind. Now, I don't know at what point you get discouraged, but as I study this story, I'm always testing myself against it too, wondering how my attitude is when we just got a new set of propellers. First one breaks, then we get a new one. And then we're, putting it on going, finally, we can get this thing going. By the way, we need to get this flight in before the weather gets so bad that we can't even, we get snow drifts, on the ground. It's like, we need to get this done. And then the next propeller breaks. This is not an easy fix, by the way. Orville has to go by train. By the way, flight doesn't exist yet. So he has to travel back to Dayton, which is no small journey, which he has 40 miles of ocean waters to go across to just to get to Norfolk, Virginia. I mean, this is not something that is simple to get home. And so I'm definitely feeling thin as I'm going through this story, going, can I keep going? The fight. Nothing is going to stop us. Orville Wright, in a letter to Catherine upon his arrival in 1903, he said, every year adds to our comprehension of the wonders of Kitty Hawk. Now, that's a funny statement because Kitty Hawk is actually not a very beautiful place. It is a very miserable place. If you were to measure it on human standards of comfort, we would all say, I don't want to hang out in Kitty Hawk. The Wright brothers love Kitty Hawk. Isn't that just a tremendous irony that they have grown to love it? And with each passing year, they love it more. Wouldn't it be nice in our spiritual life if we could say the same about our Kitty Hawk? The different things that actually are challenging to our soul become more and more beautiful to us as we progress in our spiritual life because we see the benefit. They have grown so much in and through Kitty Hawk. So when they arrive at Kitty Hawk, they love it. They're in seventh heaven. No one in their life back home can figure out what's wrong with these guys. David McCullough says it this way, days passed, still too cold to work. Puddles about the camp turned to ice. All the same, the brothers were entirely comfortable. See, that's a soul comfortability because there's nothing comfortable to the outside. David McCullough says it this way, by all evidence, the brothers had suffered in spirit, not in the least. So with all of these challenges, they're still cracking jokes, they're loving it, they feel great, they're confident, their faith is not waned, even though the friction has massively increased. Orville Wright writes home November 23rd, 1903, unless something breaks in the meantime, we feel confident in success. Unless something breaks. Everything just broke. I mean, first of all, when it's cold, everything breaks quicker than it ought to, right? So unless something breaks in the meantime, we feel confident in success. The flight. We are determined to see this work. David McCullough says this: Orville reached Kitty Hawk at midday, December 11th, 1903, a Friday, and spent that afternoon with Wilbur unpacking the goods. Remember, he went to get a new propeller, to build a new propeller. By the way, they invented this propeller. It's not something that existed. They had to build it. And so they invented this propeller that kept breaking. And spent that afternoon with Wilbur unpacking the goods. Saturday, the wind was too light to make a start on level ground. On the afternoon of Monday the 14th, all final repairs attended. They hauled the 605-pound flyer the quarter mile over to the big hill, to the face of the slope where they had positioned the 60-foot launching track. So the two of them just didn't carry 605 pounds. They had a whole bunch of men that came out from Kitty Hawk and lugged this thing up. You can't even imagine what that process would have been like. But they had positioned a 60-foot launching track. I should have had a picture of it, but it would sort of be like these blocks, these square carpet squares, and it'd be about that width, and it went 60 feet, and it was sort of like a railroad track, if you could liken it to something, because you couldn't slide. When an engine starts and it's creating a propulsion, it couldn't slide upon the sand, so they had to create something like a runway that it could move along. So they created their own runway. I mean, everything about this process, if I were to dive deeper into the specificity, you guys, if you understood it, your minds would just be like, whoa, it is so interesting what they solved every single riddle. Everything was set. There was no debate or extended discussion over which of them should go first. They simply flipped a coin. Wilbur won. Then off they went. Orville running as fast as he could, holding on until no longer able to keep up. By the way, I'm skipping a lot of stuff here. But at the end of the track, Wilbur made a mistake. Pulling too hard on the rudder, he sent the flyer surging upward at too steep an angle. To compensate, he nosed it downward, but again too abruptly, and the machine hit the sand 100 feet from the end of the track. So before I get into what we call the 69th attempt, I just want you to evaluate where your soul's at, because I'm guessing all of us have been here in this zone where you work, you labor, you try again, you have resistance, but you're going to overcome that resistance. You keep going, but there's more resistance. Propeller breaks. You ship it back home. You get a new one. The propeller breaks. Now you travel all the way home to Dayton and come all the way back. And you get it to the place where you're finally ready. And it's taken way, way longer than it should have. Your mental picture would have been you're testing this in mid-October. Instead, here you are in mid-December. And it's cold. And it's very difficult to just sort of act like it's not a big deal here. You got gusting, frigid winds. You got puddles of ice, the puddles that were there. Now they're iced. So I don't know what you call a puddle of ice. Is it just an iced over puddle? Maybe that's what it's called, an iced over puddle. And so this is difficult, guys. And I'm going to call this the 69th attempt. I've used this illustration multiple times over the years, and it just says it very beautifully to my soul. So hopefully it helps you too. So I'm going to call what they're at is the 69th attempt. Now, technically, that was their first attempt in the Wright Flyer 4, this version that is actually going to eventually fly. But it is the attempt before the one that actually works. And have you ever had it where you want to give up and you're actually at the 69th attempt? See, the 70th attempt in this story I'm about to share with you is the one that worked. And yet we reach that final attempt, that one before the one that works, and that's oftentimes when we have the biggest gorilla on our back. So they were the Wright brothers were one attempt away from the breakthrough. One measly attempt, but this is often the toughest moment. So I'm going to read this quote from Tamerlane, who is a famous 14th century military leader and tactician. He said this: "I was once forced to take shelter from my enemies in a ruined building where I sat alone many hours. Desiring to divert my mind from my hopeless condition, I fixed my eyes on an ant that was carrying a grain of corn larger than itself up a high wall. I numbered the efforts it made to accomplish this object. The grain fell 69 times to the ground, but the insect persevered. And the 70th time it reached the top. This sight gave me courage at the moment, and I never forgot the lesson. You know how discouraging it would be to be the little insect carrying this huge thing, bigger than you, right? What business does that ant carrying that grain of corn anyways? Come on, ant, give up. Has it not been proven to you that you can't do it? And these are the moments that test our soul, where the friction against our faith is so real, so tangible, that the argumentation to stop trying is very, very real, and it seems very, very reasonable. And yet, that ant is proving something, which is why Proverbs is going to even utilize the ant as an illustration too. There's something about an ant that is fairly special. But could you imagine how discouraging it would be to carry this grain of corn all the way up the wall and then right at the last minute to have it fall and then bounce further than from where you originally started, and then have the audacity to go back down and pick it up and act like you could do this again? And I mean, sometimes on the 69th attempt, it like bounces and it goes under like, your desk in your room. It's like, now it's even harder to get to. It's difficult to persevere. I'm not going to argue that. However, it's the essence of the spiritual life. Faith is proven in those moments, not when it's easy, not when it's obvious, but when it's so difficult. And it seems that the natural realm stands wholly opposed to your success. Ekikeo means to give up, to let go of the grain of corn, to cease trying. Now, if you look up the, in Strong's Concordance, you're not going to see it mention grain of corn in there. That's Eric adding that into the definition. But it means to give up, to grow tired, to grow weary. You guys heard some different scriptures in the Bible about growing weary and well-doing. And this is the idea. This is what we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to allow this into our life. That is one of the clear commissions from Jesus himself to us, is this idea of giving up doesn't exist in the Christian life. What's that? I remember William Gurnall, who wrote Christian Complete Armor, when he's describing the armor of God in Ephesians 6, he makes a comment, and it was out of all this thick book. If any of you have ever read Christian Complete Armor, it's a massive book. It's this one line I remember out of the whole thing. Unfortunately, I don't remember much about the book other than thinking that was really good, except for this one line, and that God made no provision of armor for the back. In other words, we don't turn and run from battle. We keep persisting in battle. And that always stood out to me. We don't have this ekikeo, to give up, to let go of the grain of corn, to cease trying. So Luke 18:1 talks about this and uses this very word. Men ought always to pray and not to faint or to lose heart. So the same verse, men ought always to pray and not to give way to ekikeo. In other words, to not let go of the corn, not to forsake the job description that we have. See, prayer is an animation. It's an evidence of our faith in God, because we continue to pray when we believe that God continues to desire to do what he promises. So our prayer is an evidence of our faith. And so when we stop praying, what have we done? We've stopped saying, God, could you please help me with this project? Could you please help me get this grain to where it must go? So here's the same verse, Luke 18:1. Men ought always to pray and not to faint, or men ought always to pray and not to set down the grain of corn. And here's another passage in Galatians 6:9, which is going to basically show the same thing. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we, and then I'm going to put in parentheses here, do not stop carrying the corn up the high wall. If we do not grow weary, if we do not cease, if we do not give up. 2 Thessalonians 3:13, But as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. Here's another way of saying it. Do not give up, even though you've done it 69 times, only to see that heavy grain of corn fall to the ground. David McCullough has a quote here. Now, this is actually an adapted quote, and there's a reason for that, is you guys don't know what's going to happen right now. So, on December 14th, they're going to attempt flight, and it's not going to go so well. The very first attempt, there's going to be mistakes. It's somewhat of a disaster, okay? They've been working so hard for this. It is so cold outside, and they just want to be able to accomplish this and then get back to Dayton. And yet again, there's going to be a problem. And so I want to give this quote, which I will give a little later in its fullness without some of my corrections to it, but I want you to sort of get into the soul of the situation. And this is how it's written. It had taken 4 years to get to this point. Now, to get to this point is me adding something in, okay, because I'm trying to give an attitude to it. They had endured violent storms, accidents, one disappointment after another, public indifference or ridicule, and the clouds of demon mosquitoes. To get to and from their remote sand dune testing ground, they had made 5 round trips from Dayton, counting Orville's return home to see about stronger propeller shafts. A total of 7,000 miles by train, all for this? Now, I added it that way, but that's the incredulous attitude inside of our soul the devil is trying to incite. All for this? How many times have I carried that grain up the wall only to have it bounce further away? What has been accomplished up to this point? Not much. Now, technically, if you were to evaluate the situation, if you know that just in a couple days they're going to fly, then you know how important everything they have done is up to this point. But if you conclude that they may never fly, this is all a waste. And that's the key, that battle internally of the value of all of the small moments of movement forward. All of the obedient steps matter. In a story like this, you can see it. All of those days of living in a tent, all of those days of, as they would say, having their toes covered with their blanket and then their head freezes, so they cover their head with their blanket and their toes freeze, and they cover their toes with their blanket, their head freezes. All of this over and over again, all the ridicule, all the mockery, all of it is worth it if they fly. But what if they don't? What if what we just saw of Wilbur, going straight up in the air and then crashing straight down and then breaking the plane yet again, what if that's just all that is the future? That's all that they have to look forward to. Boy, this could be a great moment for discouragement. And this is the testing of our soul. So Matthew 10, verse 22, Matthew 24, verse 13, and Mark 13:13 all say something almost exactly the same. This is Jesus talking. But he who endures to the end will be saved. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. Now, when we hear that, we have a tendency to think of going through the difficulties of persecution, of even the threats of martyrdom, and saying, yes, Lord, I will not deny you. I will go all the way to the end. And there's nothing wrong with that conclusion. I think that would be a very accurate conclusion. It's someone who's willing to hold tightly to their faith in Christ, even to their last breath. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at this. But there's also the micro way of looking at it that applies to our daily life. And that is that when God sets something in front of us, when he begins a work, he promises to complete it. The question is, are we going to participate in that? Or are we going to jump ship and say, I don't know if he's going to come through? You see, this is the testing of our faith. And when we endure to the end, even if it's not the capital E end of our life or the end of all time, but when we endure to the end of that faith challenge, we will find God's power demonstrated through a salvation. Even if it's not salvation of our soul, it's a salvation in this situation. It's flight. All of that mattered. All of that. You endure. Keep going. Don't waste all of this. Keep going until the breakthrough. This is the commission to our souls. This is the essence of how the kingdom works. This is the pattern. The pattern of success in the Christian life involves perseverance. As you take a step forward in your faith, you're going to be hit and hit and hit and hit. You're going to be given reason to give up, another reason to give up, yet another reason to give up. Get used to it, guys. However, have the attitude of the New Testament in how you respond to that. You consider it pure joy. That very challenge that the enemy's throwing at me is actually my secret of success. When I consider it pure joy, it is going to build patience in me, which is then going to perfect me and make me even stronger for the next test that comes. God is building superheroes. They're called Christians. But the Christian has to leverage the difficulty. Gaining an immunity to discouragement. Doesn't that sound like a nice thing to have in your hip pocket? That discouragement has no ability to work on you. You're just immune to it. It's like water off a duck's back. Discouragement tries to land on you and it just sort of bubbles up and drips off. It can't get through. It can't touch your soul. So for this to happen, this immunity to discouragement, I'm going to describe it this way. It's a state of soul health that doesn't just happen. Like one day you wake up, it's like, I wish I could just be immune to discouragement. And then suddenly you are. To become immune to discouragement, this thing, this concept, this power in your life must be cultivated by staring down 1,000 discouragements and winning. You see, with every stare down of a discouragement, you get stronger towards discouragement. Why? Because what you're doing is you're applying faith. And when you apply faith, what do you see? God's faithfulness. And when you see God's faithfulness, what does it do to your faith? It grows it. You see, with every tackling of a discouragement, when you look to see God through it, instead of the natural realm of what you think should have happened, you believe. And you say, my God is in total control right now. My God will turn even this for good. My God will triumph. Watch what my God will do. When you handle your discouragements that way, instead of allowing them to beat you down, you grow through it because God inevitably will be faithful. He's just looking for those of us that are willing to trust him. David McCullough, this is his description in the historical record of the Wright brothers of how they respond to Wilbur's crash after all these years. Listen to this. The brothers were elated. Okay, wait, stop right there. Wait a minute. This is not a good moment, Wilbur and Orville. This is not a good moment. You guys have trained, have worked, have been persecuted, clouds of mosquitoes, cold feet, cold head. I mean, we've had so many trials, and it didn't work. The brothers are immune to discouragement at this point. They see something, and they will not be knocked off that horse. They know what they're after, and they're going to get there. How could they be elated? Listen to their reasoning. Motor, launching device, everything had proven reliable. Damage was minor. And what we want to say is, but there's damage. Damage is minor. Wilbur's error in judgment from lack of experience with this kind of apparatus had been the only cause of trouble. That's easy to fix. The brothers were elated. Okay, guys, now that is one of the strangest responses to a discouragement I can imagine hearing. The brothers were elated. When you are caught in the history books, say 120 years from now, and the world is able to look in and study your trials, what will the response be that gets written down? The brothers were elated. I think that is one of the most profound statements. It's just a little, nondescript statement in this particular version of their story, but it sure does stand out to me. David McCullough says it this way: the repairs took 2 days. You guys see where we're landing? December 14th was their first trial. The repairs took 2 days. Not until the late afternoon of the 16th was the machine ready. What is that setting us up for, guys? December 17th, 1903. You see, you know something about December 17th, 1903. But what do they see? They see the same thing, just from a different angle. They know this is going to work. Well, what about all the voices, all the smart people out there that say no one will ever be able to fly? Human-controlled flight is a myth. It is never going to happen. Get it through your thick skull, world. This is never going to happen. And yet the brothers, working further into December than they ought to, by the way, this is the worst possible weather. I mean, can't we just wait till next year? Let's punt this out another year. Oh no, we have not come this far to give up now. Only 5 men showed up the morning of Thursday the 17th. After the brothers hung a white bed sheet on the side of the shed, the signal to the men at the life-saving station that their help was needed. Many, as Orville later explained, were apparently unwilling to face the rigors, this is in quotes of Orville speaking, rigors of a cold December wind in order to see, as they no doubt thought, another flying machine not fly. You see, the Wright brothers believe. And I mean, you can't really blame all the guys at the life-saving station for maybe not believing, right? Has one ever flown? No. So why would they get out into the frigid cold winds and help see yet another flying machine not fly? And that's the difference of those of us that have been given faith. I mean, the fact that there were 5 men that showed up is actually fairly impressive in my mind. And yet, how many men are going to regret the fact that they didn't show up this day, this extraordinary day in history, because of their lack of faith? David McCullough says, the day was freezing cold. Skims of ice covered several nearby ponds. A gusty wind was blowing hard out of the north. Wilbur is going to say, the wind usually blows, Wilbur had reminded his Chicago audience in June. It was blowing at nearly a gale force of 20 to 27 miles per hour, far from ideal. Isn't that an irony that, I mean, for those of us that know December 17th, 1903, we don't think about it being far from ideal. In fact, most of us have never really thought about what they're doing trying to fly a plane at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in mid-December in the first place. Because for all practical purposes, you should be home and in bed, guys. This is the winter. This is not when you try and do things like this. And yet, they're determined. They know this plane will fly. I mean, it's a big deal to build a plane like this. They have spent months, not just at home constructing it, but then transporting it, constructing it here, going back and forth, trying to fix this crazy propeller. Now they have it ready. And yet, to even try on December 17th is totally ridiculous. Orville Wright said as much in a later reflection upon this attempt. He said, I'm utterly amazed at our audacity in attempting flights in a new and untried machine under such circumstances. David McCullough says it this way, because Wilbur had won the toss 3 days before, it was now Orville's turn. The two shook hands as if saying goodbye. Then Wilbur went over to the others and told them not to look so glum, but to cheer Orville on his way. John T. Daniels, who was this big hulking guy that was a part of this whole storyline, was there, and he said, we tried to cheer Orville on, but it was mighty weak shouting with no heart in it. Go! See, they're not expecting anything. It's like yet another crash to pick up. David McCullough says, Orville now positioned himself on his stomach at the controls, as Wilbur had, while Wilbur stood to the right at the tip of the lower wing, ready to help keep the machine in balance as it started down the track. At exactly 10:35, Orville slipped the rope restraining the flyer and it headed forward, but not very fast because of the fierce headwind, and Wilbur, his left hand on the wing, had no trouble keeping up. At the end of the track, the flyer lifted into the air, and Daniels, who had never operated a camera until now, snapped the shutter to take what would be one of the most historic photographs of the century. There it is. You can see the track, the 60-foot track that he just is coming off of. You can see Wilbur having run the whole distance trying to stabilize it. And that is the first time in history that human-controlled flight was achieved. And we actually have a picture of it. John T. Daniels, who had never taken a picture in his life, was the one to push, to squeeze the bulb. David McCullough says, the course of the flight, in Orville's words, was extremely erratic. The flyer rose, dipped down, rose again, bounced and dipped again like a bucking bronco when one wing struck the sand. The distance flown had been 120 feet, less than half the length of a football field. The total time airborne was approximately 12 seconds. You guys recognize something about 12 seconds? That's the name of this message. That is pathetic. That's what everyone wants to say. That is pathetic. You're going to call that flight? Yep. This is something amazing that has taken place. And yet it is so non-amazing in its exterior. It's sort of like the old tabernacle covered in badger skin. It's where the presence of God dwells, but it's covered in badger skin. It's like this is such a monumental accomplishment, but it's sort of clouded in humility. In a strange way, it's like it's hard to brag about 12 seconds, but it's 12 seconds that most people said could never be achieved. Orville Wright says, it was only a flight of 12 seconds, and it was an uncertain, wavy, creeping sort of flight at best, but it was a real flight at last. David McCullough says, at about 11 o'clock, the wind having eased off somewhat, Wilbur took a turn and went off like a bird for 175 feet. Orville went again, flying 200 feet. Then near noon on the fourth test, Wilbur flew less than a quarter mile through the air in a distance of 852 feet over the ground in 59 seconds. So the principle of one more attempt. I don't know what you are facing. I don't know what obstacles loom in front of you, what impossibilities stare you down. However, you, as a believer in Jesus Christ, ought to have a confidence that the God who has begun a work in you is faithful to complete it. That the God who has rescued you from the punishment of your sin, from the powers of earth and hell, from the enslavement to the devil, the same one has given you all that you need for life and godliness, which means every step forward, he will empower and enable. Sometimes his ends are different than ours. I'm guessing the Wright brothers, when they thought of flying for the first time, did not think of a wavy, creepy flight of 12 seconds. And yet, what just got accomplished is something superhuman. It demanded these two men to actually persist and persist and persist and persist and persist and keep persisting when everyone else around them would have gone home. And that quality is something unique to the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't mean that men can't mimic it, but it shows the very pursuit of God towards the human soul. How he won us. He is going to persist and persist and persist and persist. And God is a persevering God. Isn't that just a fascinating statement? We always think of perseverance as being a quality that humans ought to have. Yes, that's important for us to have. But to recognize that the God that we serve has this in his very nature. That he is a God who stares down impossible possibilities and chuckles at them. When the nations surround him, the kings of the earth take their stand against the Lord's anointed, the one enthroned in heaven laughs. And that is the same disposition that we are to have as we have a faith position in Christ. One more attempt. One more attempt. See, every day when we wake up and the enemy wants to remind us that something that we have been after has not happened, something that we've prayed for has not yet been answered, what do we think? One more attempt. Let's pick up that grain of corn and let's go up the wall again. And what's extra hard is when you pass 69 and 70 and 71, and then the illustration that Eric gave was it's supposed to be 69, and then the next one's supposed to, and it's like you're at 3,422, and you wake up the next day and say, one more attempt. You see, that next attempt, just like the next day of your life could be the day Christ returns. It's like you live with an anticipation to finish this race well. No matter if it's a small micro race in your life or it's a capital R race in your life, that you are going to live it well, and every day, this is the attempt. This is the one that breaks through. This is the one. That's what faith is. And if it doesn't, what do? You get back up and say, this will be it. You keep trying. You keep going. You keep launching that, flying machine into the air. And even if it crashes, you fix it and you get back up and you do it again. One more attempt. Sometimes that is all it takes. David McCullough says it this way. So this is that quote I read you earlier that I said this is, somewhat adapted to try and make a point where I'm showing the reasons they could be discouraged. This is David McCullough's statement after they succeed. And it really is profound. It had taken 4 years. They had endured violent storms, accidents, one disappointment after another, public indifference or ridicule, and clouds of demon mosquitoes. To get to and from their remote sand dune testing ground, they had made 5 round trips from Dayton, counting Orville's return home to see about stronger propeller shafts, a total of 7,000 miles by train, all to fly a little more than a half mile. No matter, they had done it. The faith, the friction, the flight, the faith, the friction, the fight, the flight, the power of perseverance. So, this is the way I want you to think about it. You have faith, which then leads to friction. If you exert faith in this natural realm, it's weird, but you will get friction. And then you fight, and you gain flight. And then what do you get? I'm going to call it upgraded friction. It's like the enemy actually ups his game. It's like, okay, we only used 1 demon against him. Now we at least need 2, maybe 3. Let's bring in 4. Let's bring in 500. This is how the game works. The more of a threat you become, the more attention you're going to get. The friction will increase. But with the increased friction comes an increased strength. You see, all that the enemy is meaning to harm us, to hinder us, actually is our great leverage. It is that which increases our strength. So the upgraded friction, the bitter retaliation of the enemy towards faith, fight, and flight. David McCullough says it this way. This is really interesting, guys. There was talk of going again. So they've flown 4 times. Nothing that impressive, by the way. We have 59 seconds in the air. That's it's pretty amazing, right? There was talk of going again, of even attempting a flight down the beach to the weather station. But a sudden gust caught the flyer and tossed it along the sand. And this is John T. Daniels saying, just like you've seen an umbrella turned inside out and loose in the wind. Daniels, remember John T., he's the big guy. John T. Daniels had been standing holding an upright of one of the wings and suddenly found himself caught in the wires and the machine blowing across the beach, heading for the ocean, landing first on one end and then on the other, rolling over and over, and this is John Daniels talking, and me getting more tangled up in it all the time. All 600 plus pounds of the machine, plus Daniels, who weighed over 200 pounds, swept up by the wind as though they weighed nothing at all. John T. Daniels, in his recollection, says, I wasn't hurt much. I got a good many bruises and scratches and was so scared I couldn't walk straight for a few minutes. The brothers ran up to me, pulled my legs and arms, felt all my ribs, and told me there was no bones broken. They looked scared too. David McCullough says, from that day on, Daniels could proudly claim to have survived the first airplane accident. He bragged about it his entire life. This is interesting, though. They've accomplished something. 5 men from Nowheresville have witnessed it. They can't invite a crowd out now to see it. They can't fly to this weather station and have everyone at the weather station witness it. And right at this moment of achievement, the wind is going to gust. Talk about some friction. And actually carry it away and break it to pieces, by the way. Their new flying machine that just took months of just assembling, going back and forth to Dayton to get the propellers fixed. Now they've done it. And right as they're ready to show it off to the world, it gets picked up in a wind, John T. Daniels inside of it, and crashes multiple hundreds of yards away in a heap. That's all the flying they got done, right there. They're unable to show the world any more than that. They now have to take this wreckage back to Dayton. It's never going to fly again. That was the grand achievement that was made. And the moment they have the flight, what happens? They get an upgraded friction. And I haven't gotten into it yet, but I've hinted at it. The friction that they're just about to have is greater than any they had before they started flying. Because no one is going to believe them. And they can't just whip out flyer number 4 and take off and say, see, it's a wreck. They have to build a new plane to prove that they did fly. Oh, 12 seconds. It may not sound like much, but those 12 seconds changed the world. So I have a story some of you may have heard. I call it grabbing a hold of the banister. But it's a 12-second moment in my life. 12-second moments are when you actually, with your faith, face the friction, fight until you have flight. Like Jacob, you hold on to the man of God and you wrestle through the night until you get what that man of God has. It's like the persistent widow that, I guess the persistent widow nagged. She pulled on the judge's coat sleeve. That's my picture. But it's like the persistent neighbor that will not stop knocking until the fellow neighbor opens up their door and gives them the bread that they need. This is the pattern of the kingdom, that when you do this, you will find victory, salvation, breakthrough. So there was some temptation that was down lurking in the lower levels of a house when I was younger. This is right in the season of growth, spiritual growth for me, where I'm learning. I didn't have language. No one had really taught me triumphant Christianity. I told that I was supposed to not do certain things, but I didn't understand how to not do them. It's sort of like, yeah, you're supposed to fly. Well, how do you fly? Well, we don't teach that. We just tell you to fly. And so that's the way it was. It's like, be moral. Be good, love your neighbor. You're supposed to do all these supernatural things. Rejoice in all circumstances. Like, what? How do you do that? And so there was an impediment in my soul where I kept going back to the wrong well. I kept repeating the wrong behaviors. Even though I esteemed God, I esteemed purity, I esteemed his ways, I didn't have power to perform it. But I was convinced, this is where the faith comes in. It's like the Wright brothers believing that flight existed. It's like, I believe, even if no one has ever told me how this works, I believe that when God says that we are to take every thought captive, that when God says that we are to be pure, when God says we're to be perfect as he is perfect, that he gives some supply for this, that there's some empowerment. I know it exists, I just don't know what it is, and I've never experienced it. So there I am in the middle of the night being tempted by something, and I'm really glad I don't remember what it was. And I'm at the top of the stairs. And up to that point, I would always go down. It was like once you get to a certain momentum in sin, oh, it's got you. You can't turn back. And I grabbed the banister at the top of the stairs. I said, God, I don't want to go down there. I want something new. I don't want to keep doing this. And I know you have something. I know you have something. And I'm not going to let go of this banister until I find it. And I don't know how long I stood there. I've always said somewhere around an hour. And in an hour, I went back to bed. I actually gained something in my life that night, even if it was just 12 seconds. And even if I didn't have language for it, I now understand biblically that was grace that I was getting. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand the language because grace to me by the modern church was always just talking about the hug of God in the midst of your difficulty, your sin. It's like how he covers it over instead of how he enables you and empowers you to live. But it was a cloud the size of a man's fist, just like Elijah had. It was enough evidence to my soul to say, God does give us power. See? God, it was flight for Eric Ludy. And I know it wasn't that impressive. No one saw it on the outside. It was a mere 12 seconds of flight, 120 feet, and you could, no one's going to brag about it, right? And yet for me, it was a breakthrough. And then it was learning how to live that out. Okay, what did I learn there? How can I do that again? The famous telegram. So this is I have a copy. I don't have an actual copy. I could have a copy. This is just the text of it. Very similar, in fact, identical to the way it came through. There are some mistakes in here. I didn't make them. These are the original mistakes. This is how it reads. Success, 4 flights Thursday morning, all against 21-mile wind, started from level with engine power alone. Average speed through air, 31 miles, longest 57 seconds. Informed press, home for Christmas. Orville Wright. So Orville spelled wrong. It was 59 seconds, not 57 seconds. But that's how it was sent. Isn't that cool that we actually have the original communication? I could have put a telegram up there, which probably would have been wiser than this. What had they actually accomplished? Let's let David McCullough say it. Their flights that morning were the first ever in which a piloted machine took off under its own power into the air in full flight, sailed forward with no loss of speed, and landed at a point as high as that from which it started. John T. Daniels said, I like to think about it now. I like to think about that first airplane, the way it sailed off in the air, as pretty as any bird you ever laid your eyes on. I don't think I ever saw a prettier sight in my life. He continues, it wasn't luck that made them fly. It was hard work and common sense. They put their whole heart and soul and all their energy into an idea, and they had the faith. The faith, the friction, the fight, the flight, the upgraded friction. And then pack it all up, head back to Dayton, and do it all again. This is the loop. It's like this is technically the loop of your life too. You're going to have a faith, and you're going to move forward with that faith. And what are you going to run into? Friction. So then what do? You fight, you stand your ground, and you gain victory. And then what do you find? Upgraded friction. So what do? You respond with your faith, and you fight, and you fight, and you fight until you fly. And then what do you find? Upgraded friction. You see, in this process, you are being built into a man or a woman of God. You are being established on this earth to change this earth. David McCullough says, success it most certainly was, and more. What had transpired that day in 1903 in the stiff winds and the cold of the Outer Banks in less than 2 hours' time was one of the turning points in history. The beginning of change for the world far greater than any of those present could possibly have imagined. With their homemade machine, Wilbur and Orville Wright had shown without a doubt that man could fly. And if the world did not know it yet, they did. I remember at that banister moment, the world may not know that God saves in every moment of our life, that he actually supplies the grace to overcome. The world may not know, but I did. Those 12-second moments are actually what changed the world. I am who I am today because of those 12 seconds. And if you were to trace back so much of my understanding, even to that 12-second victory in my life, though it be puny in the light of all that happens on earth, it's significant in me and significant through me. My confidence, and what you're going to see in the Wright brothers as they move forward, they know that flight exists. You can mock them all day long. They have seen it and they have achieved it, even if they can't easily replicate it for a watching world, a mocking watching world. Lord Jesus, we just ask that you would take this idea of perseverance, of not growing weary in our well-doing, of continuing on. And when we reach that 69th time, when the corn falls back to the ground, that we would endure to the end, that we would once again pick up that grain of corn and start climbing, knowing that you are faithful and true. You will, in fact, do it. Lord, we trust you. Your ways are perfect, and we thank you for them. It's in the great name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.